What are you seeing in the industry and why is it so difficult to hire right now?
I remember seeing a picture of a McDonald's billboard saying that they were paying $19 an hour, which is higher than the average dental assistant gets paid. And the dental forums were going crazy. Like, can you work at McDonald's and not at a practice for the same amount or more? If you can shift your team's perspective to being something much broader than, hey, you're drilling and filling every day and you're scrubbing and scaling every day, it really transforms the purpose and one's purpose for being there.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Happy Practice Playbook. I'm Mo Jones, and in each episode of the show, you'll hear conversations with dentists, office managers, staff, and specialists who know how to create a happy practice. Today, we're joined by Ryan Vett, a passionate entrepreneur and international speaker and author who has experience in and out of the medical vertical, as well as a trained sommelier with two multi-location craft beverage lounges in North Carolina. Welcome, Ryan. How are you today?
Doing well, Mo. How are you?
You know, it's a good day. Kind of feels like a Monday, but it's a Tuesday, which means things are going to get better because I'm that much closer to the weekend.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to be here in Utah at Weave HQ.
So exciting. This is our first in-person podcast recording, and you're here with us. Man, I'm feeling a little nervous just because I'm so used to like doing these online. So having someone in front, but I think it'll be good. It'll be great. So we like to start this podcast off with a statistic that we like to talk about. Today's statistic is 80% of dentists find it extremely challenging to hire hygienists and assistants, while more than 70% find it extremely challenging to hire admin staff. What are you seeing in the industry and why is it so difficult to hire right now?
The staffing challenges are beyond dentistry. I mean, it's facing everywhere across the board. And I remember seeing probably about a year ago now a picture of a McDonald's billboard saying that they were paying $19 an hour, which is higher than the average dental assistant gets paid in the United States. Obviously, some are higher and some are lower, but that's the average. And the dental forums were going crazy. Why is this the case? Why can you work at McDonald's and not at a practice for the same amount or more? And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is obviously COVID has just had an impact on the way people view their life as a whole. And how they view their home life, how they view their work life, what work looks like, what that work-life balance is, and what's most important to them. It gave some people time to search for a new career path, gave some people time to search for a new job, inspired some people to go back to school and start, especially since schools that were previously only in person moved online, that provided opportunities for people to learn. And then you have the childcare crisis. So people that are normally a stay-at-home parent now have issues with daycares always closing for 2 weeks because of outbreaks of COVID or things like this. So people have really had to reevaluate their priorities, and they've taken a step away from their job, and they either have gone somewhere else or maybe are just staying home.
Okay, so one thing that I was just thinking about when you were saying that was people going back to school. So with the opportunity to go back to school, do you think that is allowing for once maybe people are wanting to go into our dental verticals that they have that opportunity to do so?
I think that's definitely a possibility. Now, the interesting thing about any medical practice is you need to practice, hopefully, in person and at least on mannequins before humans. And so some of the virtual schools aren't allowing that per se. But I think the other thing that we've seen is a lot of people nearing retirement age deciding to accelerate that. Everything from the added stress of, hey, if I go in and I have a loved one at home, that is, what am I going to bring home to that loved one? Or the extra PPE that they had to wear for so long that was hot and hard to breathe. I mean, my wife's a dentist, and she would talk about wearing the double masks and the face shield and the hairnet and all these other things, a lot of which is good PPE and I think will be here to stay. But, they had like scrub in, scrub out stations, and they would wash all their clothes at the practice. Just all these things that just made their job that much harder.
So when we're talking about maybe that environment, so I think we're talking our overall environment as well. How do you create a good workplace environment that people want to work at, that you can retain people?
Good. I mean, the old adage is you don't leave a job, you leave your manager. I think there is truth to that. And I think there's things that, I mean, even here at Weave today, I just had an awesome experience at Weave. I'll brag about you guys for just a minute. But company culture is important, and that overflows into the team, and then overflows into your customers, and same thing at a practice. It overflows into your patients. But at Weave, they let their leaders of the organization serve lunch every other Tuesday, and so I was served by high level team members here at Weave, and that's just a great. It reminds me of Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. Um, but all that to say, a lot of it goes into creating a culture that's worth working for. It is easy in a lot of small practices in particular. You've got 5, 7 people, and you become sort of a family. Well, families don't always have great times at holidays, right? There's sometimes conflict in families. And when you're in a high stress situation, that conflict usually bubbles over and becomes more prominent. And a lot of people don't always take the time to work on their culture because what's been working has been working for the past 20 years. And so one of the things that I encourage a lot of practice owners to consider is, how do you build a culture that is edifying, that people want to come to work every day? A lot of people go to their job because it's a job, right? And that's not fun for anybody. But when you go to your job because you love seeing patients smile, and I love that in dental, like literally actually smile, maybe for the first time, they had issues, and so their smile was off, or they were missing half their teeth. Now for the first time, patients can smile and see that. Like, if you can shift your team's perspective to being something much broader than, hey, you're drilling and filling every day and you're scrubbing and scaling every day, it really transforms the purpose and one's purpose for being there.
So would you say you have a formula to create a culture, or start from that, from someone who doesn't even know where to start, especially when we have, even too, if you have an office full of different personalities and people, how do you even start that?
I think one of the biggest things is being aware. Most people don't even think about their company culture or their practice culture. They just do. They just go into work and put on their white coat and drill and fill and leave. But I would say, if you can start focusing on your culture and see what's going well and what excites people to be there and what they're passionate about. I mean, we are 360-degree people. We don't just, we're not flat. We're not 2D. We don't just go to work and that's one person, the other. That all intermixes. And I think now more than ever, because the world is so mixed up. Like, if you have an exposure to something, you're staying home. Like, it's just a different world in which we live. I think understanding what makes your team a team, and really diving in and analyzing different things that make your team tick and celebrating those things.
You also mentioned servant leadership kind of earlier. So I think here at Weave, it's a little bit easier to see that example because we're in an office environment where we can have lunch and have them serve. But what about maybe like our listeners in our dental offices? What would that kind of look like?
One of the things I see so often in dental offices, and I'm going to pick on dentists for a minute. They're not the only culprit, but what I see happen is the dentist has an office manager or a team lead that basically runs the practice, and the dentist comes in and does his or her dentistry and then leaves, which is great. They can do that. The reality is, if they are the owner and they're the leader of the practice, they're not an employee of the practice, so they need to act and start leading like that person. So that means coming early for your team meetings and being present in your team huddles and not being on your phone and not just saying, yep, that's fine, I'll see these patients today. I mean, I think there is... when you're a leader, it's easy for a leader to act like their own employee and not actually step out and lead. And so I think leading by example in servant leadership, a simple way is just if you require your team to do something, you better do it too.
Okay. So we've got our initial staff that we're here and retaining. What do you look for when you're hiring a new office manager or a receptionist?
I think it goes back to culture, actually. I mean, there are tons of people with skills that can do a lot of work in the dental office. And a lot of the skills can be taught on the job. It does take skill, so you can't throw someone novice into these roles, but you can train them up over the course of time. So I think the biggest thing is not necessarily their skill, if you have someone skilled already. That's a big caveat. But it is actually the ability to make sure that they fit with the other team members they're going to be working with. Because conflict is going to happen. It's not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. How do they resolve it? Are they servant leaders too? Are they going to lay down their interests for the sake of their team? Or are they going to, stand on their ground and on their soapbox and say, no, this is the issue and the hill that I'm going to die on? So I think, hiring for culture is really good. One of the things I ask, because I've, my background is beyond dental, and I did a lot of, I was in the tech space for a while. So I hired a lot of different people in a lot of different roles. And when you're hiring a developer and a designer and a marketer and a customer service person, a salesperson, they have extremely different personalities, which is great. That's what makes a team, right? You function better with those different perspectives. But one of the questions I love to ask is, what are you passionate about? And you would be shocked how many people have a hard time answering that question. It's not because they're not passionate, but it takes them, a step back. And some people will say their family, some people will say work, some people will say being the best, winning. If it's a salesperson, they're always going to say, "I'm passionate about money. I'm passionate about winning," right? And that's what they're passionate about. Or a creative person's like, "I'm like to make the world more beautiful." And those are stereotypes. Those not cookie cutter molds, but figuring out and getting to the root of who someone is, not what they can do, is really almost always more valuable in trying to hire.
So would you say a golden answer with someone's passion that would help you determine this would be a good fit or not?
I would say just genuineness. I mean, if they're truly passionate about something, like sometimes people get really scared if they say, "Hey, I love my family. I've got these 2 kids. I love them, and you want to see a picture on my phone." By the way, that gets into a whole HR complicated thing about asking about kids and family. So don't ask specifically about kids and family. If they offer it, you can look at the pictures. That's a disclaimer. But they, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't want someone that's going to always be leaving at 2 o'clock to go to see their kids." I don't think that's necessarily true. Just if they're truly passionate about something, that usually means they're a fairly disciplined person. And then I often ask, how do your priorities revolve around your passion? And then they give this deep stare again. They're like, "What do you mean my priorities? Like, what are your priorities in life?" "Oh, well, I want to have this much money in my bank account." I said, "No, that's a goal. That's not a priority. Your priorities are the things that don't change throughout the course of your life. Your goals are the things that you can set for the month, the year, or even a decade. But the priorities are those foundational things." And for me, when I'm hiring, if someone knows and has at least somewhat decent answers, even if they haven't polished them because they're not expecting those answers, but has somewhat decent answers, it means that they're a person of conviction. They're passionate about life and what they do.
Would you say that knowing your people's passions play into the culture you create?
I think it definitely can, especially in celebrating your team. And in a small office, when you have only a handful of people, you can really remember those things. The worst thing you can do as a leader, and this is something I'm very guilty of. In fact, I've had to put systems and people in place to help me do this. Is I can have a conversation with someone and forget some of the details that they've shared, and they'll remember everything about me. And next time I go, and I'm like, "How do you remember my kids' names? You live in where?" And they're like, "No, I'm your neighbor." It's like, oh, that exact thing has never happened. But I have systems to keep notes now in place to be able to do that. But in a small team, it's really easy to remember those passions and remember what gets people excited, and prioritizing that and knowing what makes someone tick. Like if it is family, then know that when there's a crisis at their family and they ask to go, but they've been someone with perfect attendance and everything else, you need to probably let them go. Or if it's someone that just wants their work-life balance and loves to travel, and they really have been saving for this huge vacation, and there's a crisis and their car breaks down, right? Maybe you can help them out with that as a practice owner. There's just different things that you can know. If you know what people are passionate about, what they love, and what drives them, what motivates them, it's much more easy to incentivize them.
Okay. So I am definitely guilty of forgetting details and things about people and them remembering me. So what are some ways that you keep notes that keep you organized that you'd mentioned?
Yeah, so I have when possible, I bring someone with me to a meeting, or I have a note taker, like on Zoom when they're virtual calls. With permission, you have to ask before you record anyone. But I have those things so I can go back and call those, and then I've got a contact management system that basically has people's names, information, and just notes that I can stick in there and research. And I have someone that will, even if I'm going to a place, like pull bios of people and put it all together so I can have pictures and names and be a little bit more prepared.
Okay. That kind of reminds me of The Devil Wears Prada, Miranda Priestley, when she had Emily and Andy at the party, and they had to memorize all the pictures and tell who the people were.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what that just reminded
It
me
makes a huge
of.
difference, though. It makes a huge difference in making someone feel valued and important.
So how do you effectively hire a new hire?
I think hiring is one of the most important things you can do for any business, because the wrong hire, and I've got case studies upon case studies, both in dental, but really beyond, where companies that were growing and going to be extremely successful have fallen apart because of a single wrong hire. Now, that's not always the case, but hiring is important. So asking questions, that are, again, relevant to culture, I think is key. Getting to know the person and having other team members interview them. The people that are going to be working with them every day should be interviewing your potential hire. And sometimes, if that's not always possible, but when possible, that's critical. And then one of the traps I've found myself in hiring is I'm like, hey Mo, come interview this person with me, and in my head I'm already yes or no with that person, and you give the opposite answer. That's a really hard shift. But then you need to dig deeper. Why did you say that? Well, I don't like that they wear purple shoes. Well, then we can get over that, and we can, have a uniform dress code at the office. Or it's something, hey, they said something that really rubbed me the wrong way, and this is actually going to be a cultural issue, and it reveals what could potentially be, a big challenge in your practice. So I think having multiple interviews, and one of the risks right now, and I've seen this happen time and time again, is a practice hires someone, the person never shows up for the first day of work, because there's just so many people scrambling that they keep raising pay and keep shuffling and jumping jobs. And at some point that's going to cliff and fall off and go backwards a little bit. And I've already seen that happen. But you do have to hire fast right now. So you have to be very thoughtful. And if you're going to bring someone in for an interview, make sure you check all of those boxes. I know working interviews are really popular. Make sure there's time to actually talk to the team. How someone works is important, especially if they're clinical. But how they interact with your team and your patients is equally important. Because they could be the best clinician from a technical standpoint, but completely rub your team the wrong way, and your practice is going to be worse off than not having the team member at all.
So when you're talking about these group interviews, do you just take one or two people from that team to interview, or do you do an interview with the whole group?
I'm not a huge fan of group interviews. That's a personal preference. That's not a right or wrong. I have no data or statistics other than experience to say. I find people are much more honest when they're one-on-one. Just naturally, they don't feel like there's a firing squad in front of them. And second, everyone can go have that conversation afterwards. So I can say, hey, Mo, what did candidate Y say? And they said that their favorite color was blue, but they told me it was green. And if you're interviewing for colors, that'd be bizarre. But something like that, and we can be like, oh, those didn't line up, or something about their work history. So it also, obviously, people get nervous during interviews, so don't judge a person's whole integrity and honesty on that. But it can give you different perspectives, because everyone interviews different and asks different questions. And some people are more conversational, and others are, have their 4 questions on their interview sheet that their HR department gives them, and they check it off and said, yes, they can do this. Yes, they play well with others. Tell me a time and you had a difficult, the 4 basic interview questions. So I think, having those team dynamics one-on-one can really open up things that might not happen in a group interview.
When you're asking for that group collaboration at those interviews, do you find it more effective with that new hire having an in-person discussion, or each person giving you giving their written feedback to you for you to review?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say both. I think that they need to write down on a piece of paper, have it there, and actually write down what's said in any conversations. Because what can happen is, our judgment, if there's a car accident right now and you're on one corner, I'm on the other, it's your view, my view, and what actually happened. We have 3 different perspectives. And so I think it's important to write that down, but also to get together as a group, because then it's like, oh, they said this and they said that, and you can start building off, and you might kind of peel back the onion a little further than you might have before.
Do you think in including your teams on these group interviews, that also leads to your retention success?
Absolutely. It gets people invested in working together, and that's the big thing. People long for community. I think it can help with a group interview for sure. The risk that you run into is 1 out of 5 people doesn't like the candidate, and so now you're hiring against that person's decision or recommendation, and so that causes conflict too that you have to work through. But it's better to be upfront about that and figure out what is it that you didn't like about that person. How can we navigate to get to either a resolution, or maybe that's a big enough stopping point not to hire that person. And again, in this landscape, it's hard. I mean, when you have someone that's living, breathing, and somewhat has a degree, like, you're putting them in the seat that they need to be in because of the tough hiring situation that we're in right now.
One more question about this group hiring and collaboration. Do you use the same people, or do you rotate them out of who's doing those interviews, and how do you determine that?
I would use who the person's going to work most closely with. If you have too many people and the whole team does it, and you've got like a 7-hour interview, A, you're going to wear down your candidate, and they're going to be like, this is terrible. B, you're going to increase your likelihood of someone opposing the candidate. But if you have, if there's 2 or 3 people that this individual is going to work with, that's who I'd have interview. It doesn't have to be a bunch of people. So when I say group interview, it's usually more than 1. but it doesn't have to be more than 4 or 5.
You also mentioned how sometimes candidates won't show up to their first day of work.
Yeah.
So how would the hiring timeline affect that, and what would an ideal hiring timeline look like?
Yeah, let me take this out of dental for a minute. I own several coffee shops and craft beverage lounges in the Southeast. And one of the things that has blown my mind, and I'm not actively involved in the hiring day to day, but I am aware when people aren't showing up for the jobs and there's bigger labor force issues. One of the things that has blown my mind is we have to offer a candidate a job on the spot right now with a pay, with offer letter before they leave, and have them start usually within 24 hours. It is just an unreal world. And candidates expect to either walk away with a job or not, and expect to have a start date. We've had candidates sign their paperwork and start immediately after, if we can get them through, the necessary employment checks and make sure their identity's good, background check, that things. So it is unreal, the world in which we live. Dentistry, I think, has a little bit more flexibility, but people are quitting their jobs without 2 weeks notice. And it depends on your state and your contract, and we don't have to get into the HR side of it, but there's an honor side of it and an integrity side as a human being, giving someone that you've worked with the decency of that 2 weeks. But we're not even seeing that now. So I would say, if you're planning to hire someone and you've got multiple candidates, be really transparent. Like, hey, we've got 3 candidates or 4 candidates. This is our interview timeline. This is when we're making a decision, and stick to it. And let the other people know if they didn't get the job. Now, definitely have a signed offer letter from the candidate you offered first. Otherwise, now you've just upset the other candidates, and you're not going to get them back either, even if they were your second choice. So, and don't tell them that they were your second choice. That's bad form.
That is bad form. I would personally hate that. You were a second choice, and here you are.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Okay, so when we're talking about retaining our people and our new hires, what is the best effective way to train them? Is it you're doing the hands-on training or having your staff involved?
Yeah, there's so many unique positions in a dental office. If you think about how small an office is, like, let's boil it down to the smallest possible office. You've got really 4 people. You've got the dentist, the hygienist, the assistant, and someone in the front. That would be like the smallest bare bones office. And each one of them has different skill sets, different degrees, different experiences, and usually different personalities. So training and on-the-job training is tricky in a smaller practice. Now, if you have a big practice, they can co-train, cross-train. You've got treatment coordinators and billers, and you've got all sorts of things. So there's more flexibility there. But in a small office, let's use that model for example. I go back to culture. I know I've been harping on that word, but it's so important. Does everyone that's in your practice know why you exist? And most dental practices are like, I'm not a big company. I don't need a brand and mission statement and vision statement. And I sort of subscribe to that's a little unnecessary, but does everyone know why you exist? Is your practice all about seeing any patient that walks through your door? Is your practice all about providing the highest quality, even if that comes at a high cost? Is your each practice has an ethos. And so what is that makes your practice tick, and communicate that over and over and over again? And what are your core values? Is it drill and fill in and out as fast as you can? Or is it, hey, we want to have 2-hour hygiene appointments so we get to know about everybody's family tree and their history and how they first came to this country, whatever it might be. And there's practices for both. But I think making sure you really not only drill that in when you're training someone, but that's the breadth of your practice. Every single time you're talking about culture and what's going well and what's going not, you can say, hey, these are our core values. And you just chewed that person out because their credit card got declined. That's not our core value, because we care about people, or whatever it might be.
So setting a foundation of what the practice is about will really lead to the success of your people, regardless of the position they're in, right?
Absolutely. We at all of our shops, and they're all very different because we try to be local. So no one knows that there's a engine behind it all. We try to be local and be a part of the community. And every single person should know that we build our whole model on creating experiences worth sharing. And the reality is, every single time someone walks into a dental office, you're creating an experience. Now, it might be worth sharing, and it might be worth sharing because it was really good or really bad, but we want to create that positive experience worth sharing so that every single person that comes through our door is better off having been there than before. And we personally invest in our team first, because if we invest in our team first, they're going to invest in our partners who invest in our guests. Same thing I think is true at a dental practice. If you invest in your team and you love your team well, they're going to be smiling when that patient walks through their front door. They're going to have that happy voice on the phone when you pick up the phone, and they're going to see that little pop up from Weave that has the family information. They're going to be able to wish happy birthday and ask about Johnny's soccer game last week, and it's just going to be a much more engaging experience. But if it's just a job, it's Dr. Smile's office, and then that horribly awkward silence on the other end, and it's just not personal.
In investing in your team, how do you find the balance of how flexible you are with people's schedules and preferences?
So dental is one of the harder industries. This is any medical, right? Your patients come on a schedule and you have to be there. Customer service is another one. When someone picks up the phone, they want it to be there. Someone to answer on the other end. Restaurant and service and hospitality are another one. The schedules can't be as flexible because of the nature of the job. So the reality is you can't always let someone go at 2:00 unless it's truly an emergency. And if that's the case, you want to do anything possible to make sure that you're caring for your team in whatever emergency that they have to deal with. So you find flexibility in other ways. Either, every other week you cut your Fridays short, or, you give more time off in the summer, or you give more paid time off. I mean, I know one practice that gives 6 weeks of paid time vacation, a dental practice, which is ridiculous. But that's important because they have really hard schedules. The other, can't do fast math. What is that? 46 weeks of the year. And they take 2 other weeks off. So I think they have 8 weeks off. It's unreal. But I think being able to, since flexibility isn't always a thing, especially in the healthcare, finding other ways to be flexible and reward behavior. If there's no patient scheduled on the hygienist column and all the notes are done and everything's ready to go, send them home. Don't make them wait around, if that's possible. So.
Okay. Well, we are almost out of time. So we always like to end our show with what we call our motivational tip, which is one page out of your playbook that you could give to our listeners that has brought you success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been talking a lot about people, so I'll give a tip about people, not necessarily about teams. But I think as a leader, and this is for leaders that want to have a happy practice. By the way, I'm going to say happy practice playbook before I get up and speak now. That's so much better than like many mumbling mice make midnight music in the moonlight. Like that was like happy practice playbook. That'll take a while to get that muscle memory. But leaders, leading can be hard. If you're the solo practitioner in an office and you're the practice owner, there's no one you can talk to. You're at the top, and you get everyone's good stuff and usually more of the bad stuff. And I have found as a leader, in order to have joy in your life, because you have to be joyful to overflow that into others, I've always kept 3 people in my life. The first one is what I call a forerunner. If you think of a race, it's the person who's at the front, the person who's gone before you. It's a mentor. It's someone who can pour into you because they've already been there. And I always try to keep those people in my life. The second is your running mate. Who are you running alongside of every single day? Who is that person that is in that same stage of life, same stage of work, professionally, personally, that can carry you forward? That, hey, when you're slowing down, they're like, no, you can keep going. And then the next week you'll probably tell them, no, you need to keep, it's the back and forth. And who's that person? I always, every Thursday for almost a decade and a half now, I've talked to the same person. It's not always been on Thursdays, but that's our current call time. But it's been the same person. We've gone through life together. And I have other people that I call regularly when sometimes you just need that push. So who are your running mates? And then finally, and maybe most interestingly, is who are the people that are a few steps behind you? Not because they're not good, but because they're younger, they're newer in that profession, or whatever it might be. Who are those people that are trying to be where you are in 3 to 5 years? And have those people. I often find when I have mentees or people that I'm mentoring, I learn more from the questions that they ask me and the way I answer them, and I have to actually reflect on, in that scenario I did this, and I shouldn't have done that, or that went really well, you should do that. So I always keep those 3 people in my life, and sometimes they're consistent, like the one guy I talk to every week, and sometimes they're for a year or 2 in a season of life where I am learning something new or need to figure something out.
So a forerunner, running mates, and those a few feet behind you.
Yes.
Okay. I'm already thinking of who that might be in my life. I'm trying to have my own playbook of success here.
There you go. As long as it's a happy practice playbook.
Yes.
I'm going to get that happy practice playbook.
Happy practice playbook. Well, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for being with us, Ryan. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening. Don't forget to join the Happy Practice Playbook Facebook group, where we'll be discussing this topic more and sharing other helpful resources to help keep your people happy. And as always, I'll be posting to get all of your tips and tricks as well. If you liked what you heard today, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next episode. We hope you'll join us next time. It's your girl, Mo Jones.